Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Marie Incontrera. She's an author, consultant, and speaker. Marie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I'm actually really quite fascinated to get into a bunch of the stuff that we'll cover a bit later. But maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sounds good. Well, I grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and I moved a whole 20 minutes away to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and I've been living here ever since.
Okay, very cool. So you went to university. What did you take and why?
So I had a double major in biology and music. It's actually kind of a funny story. I graduated high school early.
Okay.
And I sort of felt the pressure to do something that would, quote unquote, make me money. So I went to school for biology because I did well in science, and I realized I didn't like it. But I was already really far into my degree, and so I decided to stick with it, and I double majored in music as well.
Very cool. So what made you take that, or especially kind of music? Because I always kind of find it fascinating, and I also think understanding music and playing music, maybe you never end up doing it for a living. You maybe just do it as a hobby for the rest of your life. But I think what you learn in that transfers into so many other industries. At least that's my opinion. Do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I definitely, I did have a career as a musician.
Nice.
I was actually a full-time performing musician for a while. And I, even now it's sort of more of a hobby thing. I still do get paid for things, but I get to only take the projects that I really feel good about, which is a luxury.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah. But I do feel that my creative training really transfers into my everyday work.
No, I 100% agree. And I think even just, it's funny, just being in the industry as well and kind of growing up playing music, there's so many people that are entrepreneurial or in the startup game that either are still musicians, were musicians, a bit of both, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's always kind of fascinating to me how many musicians have kind of moved into the tech, social media, online space. So that's always kind of fascinating.
Absolutely.
So walk me through your career up until what you're doing now, because you're doing a ton of stuff, and it's really actually quite fascinating.
Thank you. Well, like I said, I started out as a musician, which really means doing a bunch of odd jobs all the time.
Sure.
Sort of getting work when you can. I was performing. I had a band that did very well. Our last performance was actually at Carnegie Hall.
Nice.
So,
Sweet.
We were super lucky. We had a really robust performance schedule for the 4 years that we were active. But it also meant that I was teaching a lot and,
right.
Taking copying work and doing anything that I could to make ends meet as a musician. And one day I was at my job teaching middle school part-time.
Okay.
And it was sort of a really difficult job. And I get a text message from a friend who is a business author and consultant. And she said, "I have an idea for you. Quit your job."
Okay, interesting.
I said, "What is?" Yeah, I said, "Okay, what?" And she said, "What? Why don't you try becoming a virtual assistant? It would be really great to make some more money. You can work from home, flexible hours.
Sure.
This way you have time to pursue your music, and it's easier to make ends meet." So I took the leap and became a virtual assistant, and then slowly People started coming to me for one of three things, and those things were social media, podcast booking, and also TEDx booking and speaker coaching. And so slowly, as I was going through that, and I realized, oh, people are coming to me for these things, maybe I should formalize my packages. And what I'm really doing now is consulting, not really being a virtual assistant.
Okay. So what fascinated me about what you're doing is you work with a lot of people to actually get them a TED Talk and help them through that process. So do you want to walk us through that journey of how you became an expert in TEDx consulting and some of that stuff?
Sure. Well, it kind of happened by accident. The same friend who said, hey, quit your job.
Nice.
Part of the reason I was able to do that is because she sort of helped me get started. And, she said, I'll, send you a few clients. And if it works out, you'll start getting referrals. And so one of the first clients that she sent me was somebody who needed to get booked on a TED Talk. He had his idea, and and she said, yeah, you could do this. Just here's the site. Here's how you book. And I said, okay, well, no guarantees. I mean, it is a TED Talk, right? Like, I
Sure.
can't make the guarantee that you'll get in. And he said, well, let's try it.
Okay.
And let's see what happens.
At least
and
you were
he ended up
honest.
Getting booked for, right. And he, in full disclosure, had already had his talk written, so I didn't help him with the idea.
Okay.
But he said, all right, let's try it for a month. I really just need somebody to send my pitch out and to send the talk idea out, and let's see what happens. And he ended up getting booked for 2 talks.
Wow. That's awesome.
So, yeah, so I was like, oh. And then because that happened, more clients started coming to me and saying, hey, could you get me a TED Talk?
Sure.
And, I used the same stipulation. I was like, no guarantees. And then, a couple of my clients got booked for at least one.
Nice.
Every client that came to me started getting booked. And I was like, oh, I must really know what I'm doing here. So let me see if I can formalize this.
Sure.
And step one of that was me doing my own talks.
Okay.
Going through the pitch process myself. I got as creative as possible with my ideas so that by the time I had done my talks, I really knew the system. I knew it worked. I knew it didn't. And I formalized it as a premium offering.
Sure. So I know I don't really want to give away everything that you do for your clients to get them a TED Talk, but what do people need to think about, or where should they come to somebody like yourself in the process?
That's a great question. And for myself, I work with people at all steps in the process. So people come to me with a completed idea. Some people come to me and say, hey, I've written this book. Here's what I consult on. Here's the blog that I write, I contribute regularly to whatever high profile publication.
Sure.
What ideas that I have could be TED stage worthy.
Nice.
So I do coach, and I do also just go through the whole pitch process. But my thinking, and so far I've been right,
Nice.
is that everybody who works with ideas for a living has the potential to give a TED Talk. And
Interesting.
it's really just a matter of taking your idea, making it something that, number one, works with the TED guidelines, and number two, is something that only you could give. So I'll give you an example. I have a lot of clients who, in the beginning, they come to me and they say, hey, I want to give a talk on being mindful.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm
sure.
like, okay, go on the TED website. And you and everybody else wants to give a talk on this, so it's really about, okay, maybe you could give a talk on mindfulness, but how do you give a talk that nobody else has given before?
Interesting. Sure. No, interesting.
So that's when I say come to me, is when when you have the ideas and you're an expert in something.
Okay. So do you work with somebody, like if I come to you, do you work with me to figure out what I could talk about based on my experience? Okay. Is there is there certain things or topics that the TEDx community is always kind of looking for, or are they looking for unique ideas, or it's kind of all over the place and they're willing to take anything as long as it's a really good talk?
That's a good question. Every TEDx event is different, so some of them have a theme, and the themes generally tend to be pretty general.
Okay.
Like, for example, I was a part of one that their theme was change your mind, change your life.
Okay.
And that can, that can be anything. That could be about art. It could be about, climate change. It could be about, tech. It could be about relationships. So that's an example. But some of them, they don't announce a theme, and then they kind of see who they get.
Okay. Interesting.
So, yeah, so it's really, in the pitch process, it's a matter of, once the idea is there and you know what you want to talk about, yes, you can hone it to fit talk's theme, but you also want to cast a wide net so that, you might get accepted in, California or New York or, Minnesota or wherever your talk is also a good fit.
Okay, so wait a second. I know, obviously, I think most people have heard of TED, if not everybody at this point. Can we step back for a sec? What's the difference between TED and TEDx? And then I want to dive a little bit deeper into the location thing you just touched on. Do you want to start there, maybe?
So
okay.
Absolutely. So TED is technology, entertainment, and design. And they're short talks, 18 minutes or less, about an idea. And they're research-backed.
Okay.
So you don't sell during a TED Talk. Like, for example, if you're talking about the ideas in your book,
right? You
don't say, in my book, I found that XYZ.
Got you.
But you talk about the research in your book.
Okay, interesting.
So
you're kind of soft selling, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
There's a concrete takeaway. It's actionable. It's something that people can use.
Right.
And it's research backed. So, you don't get up there and say, hey, I don't know, listening to music for 10 minutes a day could change your life, right?
Sure.
That could be your idea. Okay. But if it's not backed by research, it's not a TED Talk. And then TEDx are independently organized TED-style conferences.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned something. Well, I wanted that background just so people understand is, so you get people to talk at the different events, but they don't necessarily have to talk at a local event. They can talk at, anywhere globally, right? That offers one of these events.
Right.
So how does that work?
Absolutely.
How does that work, and how do you decide if I should try to talk in California or New York or somewhere else in the world?
Well, the way we do that is, and that's part of the reason that I'm in business, right?
Right.
Because there are so many talks all over the world. They're happening all the time. And the best way to get a TED Talk is to cast a wide net.
Okay. Interesting.
Right? So you say, here's my idea, and you really should be willing to go wherever they'll take you as long as they have a good video. You're going to get a good video out of this. That's the point of giving a TED Talk, is that you have this video.
Sure. That you can post online into social media
exactly.
and wherever else you want to promote, right? And to be fair, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think using something like a TED Talk gives you very good credibility. There's other ways to get credibility, absolutely. but TED is very much up there at kind of, they're one of the pinnacle things to achieve in your career. That's my opinion, and I've never done one.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Okay. So,
Absolutely. And I will say, I personally, when I did my talks, the month that I did my talks,
okay.
So the video hadn't even come out yet, were the months that I saw an increase in my business.
Okay. So
Because
why?
all of a sudden you had that name next to you. You have the TEDx logo next to your name.
Sure. So what was your talk about? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I did two.
Okay.
My first one was about jazz,
Okay.
and how jazz is a great example of innovation
Sure.
for business leaders. So it's a really great model for business leaders to be looking at when they're interested in innovation. So that was my first talk. My second talk was about exercise and earning potential, and how being healthy can statistically make you a higher earner, whether you're self-employed or working a job.
Okay. I agree with both of those, but you maybe want to give a little bit of a in-depth, quick kind of what do you cover in each one of those talks? Because I think they're very much relevant to my audience, but I also want them to go check them out online.
Sure. Yeah, and please do watch my talks. Okay, so the jazz one, it's called Jazzpreneur.
Okay.
Music is the answer to business innovation, and
Sure.
it's a look at. I tell a few stories in it about what innovation looks like. So
Okay.
one example is there was an instrument maker in the late 19th century who liked to create hybrid instruments, and most of them went down in history as kind of like these novelty instruments, like using a tuba and mixing it with a bassoon, for instance.
Okay. Interesting.
And it produces a whole different sound. So he took a bassoon and a clarinet, and he created a hybrid, and it was meant for an orchestra, but this instrument was really too loud and it was too brassy, and yet it kind of didn't work. It kind of overpowered a lot of the orchestral instruments, so it really didn't work.
Okay.
And that instrument maker's name was Adolf Sax.
Okay.
And what he had invented was the saxophone.
Interesting.
And so completely by accident, jazz musicians saw it. And what really didn't work for the orchestra actually was perfect for a jazz band, because the saxophone was unlike any instrument that anybody had ever seen. It could, it had the expressive quality, and yet it could cut through a whole jazz band.
Sure. Interesting. Very cool.
So that's one of the stories, that I tell it in that talk.
Very cool. And the second talk?
The second talk is about exercise and earning potential. So last year I started playing roller derby, and I used myself as a case study and also looked at workplace wellness initiatives and business leaders who have committed to their wellness and physical health as part of their business model. And, talking about people like Richard Branson and Mark
Sure.
Zuckerberg, they're very, very careful, and they treat themselves very, very well. And they're some of the highest earners in the world.
Sure. It's hard to argue with that, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
those are my two talks.
So I'm curious though, and I would put myself in this boat. It's hard to make time, or it's really easy to put off taking care of yourself, right? Like from a health perspective, or eating healthy, like it's so much easier to just pick up some crappy fast food that's bad for you and say, okay, well, I'm not going to work out tonight because I have a pile of stuff that I'm behind on. So how do you motivate yourself to, I'm sure like you have your cheat days where you still enjoy.
Oh, sure.
Right. And you still maybe slack off here and there, but how do you stay motivated to actually keep going, weeks, months, years later?
Well, that's a great question. And it's funny because I do have, I do get lazy sometimes.
Sure. I think we all do, right?
Yeah, especially, being self-employed and being an entrepreneur. a lot of times, I can't leave and go to the gym because I'm, really stuck on a deadline or something like that. That does happen.
Sure.
And when that does happen, I forgive myself,
Sure.
and I move on and I say, okay, the next day. But what keeps me motivated is that I think better
Interesting.
when I'm working out. I problem solve better. I have more stamina in my workday. And so what I find is that if I treat my wellness like I treat my career, that I have better results in both. So that's how I stay motivated.
Okay. Interesting. No, I think that's really good advice. So at what point though did you know that these effects of actually staying healthy and working out were actually affecting your business? Was there a defining moment, or what made you convinced that it's working?
Well, I tracked my income over time.
Okay.
And my talk is not about wellness can change your life.
Right.
That's really general. So that's actually another point for people wanting to give a TED talk. It has to be really specific.
Okay.
So it can't be, exercise can change your life, change your relationships, make you earn more money. It's like, no, you pick one of those.
Got you. Okay.
And, so I really thought about it, and I was joining a roller derby team.
Okay.
And so I knew I was going to be committing to exercising a certain amount of hours every week and really taking my wellness seriously, because if you don't eat right, you're not going to last at practice.
Right. Interesting. So being accountable to something or a team, in your case, it sounds like,
exactly.
Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So you need to figure out what works for you.
Right. And then, so I tracked my income.
Okay.
And I started earning more once I started taking exercise seriously and I started training. And I got curious about it. I did some research, and it turns out that according to Time magazine, employees who exercise earn 9% more statistically than employees in the same position who don't.
Interesting. Wow.
So, and that's because they're taking fewer sick days, they're more likely to get a raise,
Right.
they're more likely to become the go-to person for something, and the boss trusts them more because their problem-solving skills are better, they're happier at work, they're healthier, so that means that they work better. Interesting.
So how many times a week do you get in a workout on average?
I try to do at least 3-4 times a week.
Okay.
But, I keep moving every day, have a standing desk. When I take a break, I try to walk around or something like that. It really becomes part of your life.
No, I think that's really good advice, right? Because I think especially people that are doing their own thing and running their own company, it's so easy to put off, right? And so it's good to hear from people like yourself that are doing it and continue to do it, right? And just kind of hopefully motivate other people to do it for themselves as well. Because I think that's great. But you wrote a book. Do you want to talk about what the book's about and what made you actually decide to write the book?
Sure. So I actually have 2 books. The first one's about social media, but the second one is called Spread Your Idea.
Okay.
And it's about the TEDx process.
Okay.
It's about taking your idea from, I don't know what to write about,
Sure,
to having all your pitch materials ready to go, and then pitching. The book is really for people who want to pitch themselves.
Okay.
So it takes them through that process. If somebody, doesn't have the time or the, funds to work with somebody like me who will pitch them, here's a step-by-step guide to make a successful pitch for yourself.
Very cool. So obviously you decided to write the book because you've been doing it for a while, and that makes sense. So I'm curious though, what made you decide to kind of give that away to people? Because in a lot of cases you're almost sabotaging your own business, right?
Well, sort of, but you know, not everybody has like I said, has the time
Sure.
or the means to work with somebody like me. The reason people come to work with me is because they're busy professionals, and it's not that, you know, my method is not rocket science, right? Like, you know, it just takes a lot of time. Go to the,
Sure.
you know, the coaching is one aspect of things, and sort of peeling back the layers of the talk idea, you know, that requires expertise, absolutely. But, you know, the actual pitch process, it's just time consuming. And so my book is really just kind of like a quick version of here's how you do it.
Gotcha.
You know, and by the way, if you don't have time for this, you can come talk to me.
Yeah. Okay. So have you found that a lot of people that have bought the book end up hiring you to do it for them, and they just really wanted to understand the process of kind of what you're going to go through for them?
Yeah, I mean, I found I wrote the books. I have written my books over my career because I wanted that social proof aspect of things. You know, we talked about credibility, and I think that there are two things that offer maximum credibility, and one is a book, and the other is a TED Talk. But people are more likely to watch a TED Talk than read a book. So,
yeah,
so that was sort of why I wrote that.
No, I 100% agree. I actually wrote a tech book on a framework years ago, and you're right. Like, it's interesting because if you have a book published, you automatically have credibility, even if they've never even opened the book, right? It's an interesting thing. And you're right. The TED Talk is kind of the same, or maybe you could argue the next level of a book, just because people are way more likely to watch the video than actually buy your book, even if it's digitally, and read the whole thing. And the other thing, in my case, unless you understand or want to know the framework that I wrote the book on, because I had family members who are like, I'm going to read it cover to cover. It's like, don't even bother. You need to understand, you need to have a bunch of skills in a certain thing before you should even read the book that I wrote. So if you, and you're not even in tech, so like, don't even bother. It's just like, it's code examples and how to use the framework to build what you want to build. So don't bother. But it's interesting. It got me a lot of credibility in my career. Yeah. So I totally get that. But I'm curious to dive a little bit deeper into some of the other stuff that you do, because you do a lot of social media stuff. You wrote a book around launching a book and kind of the social media side, and then you do some other consulting services. So let's cover some of that stuff.
Sure. So my social media service, of course, I did write a book, and it's funny because we were saying that, and the social media book is actually more a calling card than anything. So like when somebody's on the fence about hiring me, I just send them the book, and you know, this way they get an idea of how I work.
Interesting,
you know,
that's actually really smart.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sort of happened once or twice, and I was like, oh, so I understand. A book is a calling card. Cool, you know.
Okay. So is that what motivated you to write the book originally, or how did that come to be?
Well, I love writing, and I actually did the self-publishing school program.
Okay.
You've probably seen ads for it. Chandler Gould Self-Publishing School.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was watching one of his webinars, and what sold me on it was he had a book in a weekend challenge.
Okay. Interesting.
And I said, okay, you know, like I'm a sucker for stuff like that. Like, you know, if you give me 100 days exercise challenge or, you know, 30 days of whatever, I'll do it.
Okay.
You know,
gamification works for you. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So I said, I got to try this. And so I bought the course. And, you know, I mean, of course, you're not writing a 200-page book in a weekend, but you're writing, you know, your first how-to guide.
Okay.
Or, you know, the thing, and his guide was, your first book should be about the thing that you can't shut up about.
Okay.
Or the thing that people come to you and ask you about all the time. I said, okay, well, so I have this business and I have these 3 things that I do. So I decided to write about social media because I saw a need, because I work with a lot of business authors and nonfiction authors.
Okay.
And so in 3 days, I wrote probably 90 Word document pages.
Wow.
And then it took me a little while longer than that to, edit it and publish it and everything like that. So
Sure.
that was the first book.
Okay, so what do you cover in the book? I think it's pretty clear by now, but just for people that, that maybe are still kind of wondering.
Sure. So I cover how to leverage your online presence and by the way, a book can be a product. It can be a video. It could be your new blog. It could be anything. But so the principles are the same, whether you have a book or not. So it's a good book for, pretty much anybody who has some thought leadership or a business. But it talks about how to leverage your online communities so that you get some traction around your book or your product.
No, I think that's awesome. So I'm curious though, you're obviously very much involved in the social media space and helping others and yourself promote online. What advice do you give people? Because I think there's 2 camps and I'm always on the fence. Like, obviously I need to do social media for the show. And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with social media. Part of the reason I love it so much is because you obviously can get out to a ton of people, your content, very targeted. Why I would say like the hate part of social media is I like it can be so time consuming.
Yeah.
If you're doing the wrong stuff, and in my experience, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here, is it's so trial and error per platform. And I'll try a platform for a while, and if I've had success on it, I keep using that platform. If I don't have success on that platform, I just kill it off because I just so and, like it's a full-time job for people, right? And so it can be so challenging to know what to post. If you post too much, if you post too little, like it's such a juggling balancing act. Like, what are your thoughts and advice on the whole social media space?
That's a really excellent question. And yeah, it is trial and error. If you don't know the platform, it can be months and years of trying to figure things out. But each platform has its own algorithm.
Sure.
Each platform has its own way that it works. For example, LinkedIn, it works best if you post, early in the morning when people are getting to work, and, in the middle of the afternoon when people are leaving. And maybe if you have a big following or an engaging following that's, engaging with all your posts, then maybe you post ones at lunchtime also. With Twitter, it works better if you do multiple times a day because it's a fast-moving platform. Facebook, no more than really once or twice a day. Instagram, it kind of doesn't matter. It matters a lot less. So, you look at, and it took me years to learn this stuff, but because I know each platform and I know what works and what doesn't, it's a lot less trial and error for somebody who's, worked with the platform professionally.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the other thing too, and I try to tell people this because they ask, it seems to be, you just need to figure out what works for you. Like if you're posting content at a certain time, you should try in the morning, at lunch, in the afternoon, at night, on the weekends, not on the weekends. Only
right. That's absolutely right.
Like I'll tell you, for me, posting about the show and new episodes work the best Tuesday to Thursday.
Yep.
And for Twitter and Facebook, LinkedIn for me if I post at night, and even Instagram for me seems to work the best at night. If I post early in the morning, it's so hit or miss. If I post middle of the day, why even bother? Right? And you just told me some of that overlaps, some of that's a bit different, right? And it really depends on the industry, the space you're in, parts of the world that you're targeting, right? And so it's so...
Oh, totally.
But it's interesting because I've had people say, wow, social media is garbage because I only get like 20 likes, or I got 3 new followers this week. It's like, well, sure, those numbers might be low, but if you have 3 new followers that are actually interested in your content compared to, say, 3,000 followers that maybe 1% of those people may be interested in your content, is that what's better, right?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And I've had, the thing about social media is that, you also have to take into account your existing platform. So if you start, if I start with somebody who has 50 followers
sure,
on LinkedIn and, 5 followers on Twitter or whatever, it's important to hedge your expectations. You're not going to get thousands of followers overnight.
Sure.
It's just not, However, if you have 10,000 followers and we start working together, you can expect, and you should expect, that those followers should be engaging with you.
Sure.
And so we look at things like ratios and growth and trends over time. For me, social media is not a game, and it's not abstract. So it's not like, oh, this looks really nice. No, we look at engagement every week and we say, how's this going? And if engagement dips, well, why did it dip? What content is working? What isn't? How do we adjust this? And you're right. Everybody's needs are different. I have a client who does a lot of international speaking. And so we post in the middle of the night.
Sure.
I schedule posts to go out in the middle of the night.
Makes sense. No, the engagement thing is something that I kind of want to dive a bit deeper into, because
sure,
the thing that I find really interesting, and I'll use myself as an example, is I don't know, certain platforms I have a lot more followers and engagement than others, and it's really hard. Like, it's not hard to get tens of thousands of followers. What's really hard is to get tens of thousands of people to engage with you. And and so it's better to have a few hundred followers with high engagement than tens of thousands of followers with no engagement, right? And I get it's never...
Absolutely.
But I'm curious to know, how do you get your followers, and I get it's probably different per platform, but how do you actually get engagement up? Because I think that's the hardest thing on social media.
So that's a great question. And part of it, and this kind of speaks to my other service, which is, publicity, is creating content is so important. So
sure,
the reason to be on social media, especially for a thought leader or, an author or a business person, is that you want to build digital trust with your audience, with your potential audience or your existing audience. So the way you do that is you produce content.
Right.
You have podcast conversations, or you blog, or you appear on the radio, or, you have a video blog, whatever the case is. Producing content gives people a chance to interact with you before they buy from you. And the more that they trust you, the quicker they're going to buy from you. So this is a long game. It's not, okay, you're going to do one podcast interview and everybody's going to listen to it, and then you can sell your book. It's really over a matter of months and lots of really great conversations, and of course, so using us as an example, right? Like, after this conversation comes out, I'm going to share it, and I'm going to tag you, and I'm going to make sure that you look really good in front of my audience, as in addition to me looking good in front of your audience.
Totally.
And hopefully we build from that, right? Like, hopefully some of my followers follow you now, and so hopefully some of your followers follow me.
Totally.
And it's meaningful. It's not just, oh, cool, look at this. Oh, wow, cool. No, it's oh, I listened to this, and now I trust your opinion because of what I heard you say on this podcast.
Yeah. Or you heard, like, you go on a bunch of different shows and
Right.
people have heard you on a few shows and they're like, oh, wow, I really need to pay attention to what she's doing and look at, like, in the future and what she's done in the past because I really like her content, right? It's interesting. The other
Absolutely.
thing I want your thoughts on, and it's, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but what do you think about repurposing content? There's been a lot of talk, maybe not necessarily recently, but over the last few years, where take your content and whatever it is, if you have a blog, turn your best blog post into a book, and then after that you turn it into a course, and then turn that same content into, I don't know, maybe your own podcast or radio show or TV show or whatever. What's your thoughts on repurposing content for the different mediums?
My thought is that it's definitely a good thing to do. And I'll tell you why. The reason is because not everybody consumes content the same way.
Sure.
And so, you know, the person, like, for example, this is why I have the TEDx book and my TEDx offering, is because, first of all, somebody may not have the means to work with me, but they might still get extreme value out of my content.
Sure.
To the point where they might give their TED talk and then, you know, earn more and then finally decide, okay, now I need a social media consultant.
Sure.
So who am I going to work with? Am I going to work with the person who, you know, I don't know, or am I going to work with somebody whose book I read and who helped me get a TED talk indirectly? Right.
Yeah. So, interesting. Yeah. It's the long game again, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, so the people who are listening to podcasts probably aren't also reading my blog, you know.
Sure.
So I do think repurposing content is important, as long as there's a variety of things, you know. And I see it all the time, you know. Each blog post, even from these people who have, you know, 100 and some odd Forbes articles or whatever. Not every piece is its own discrete idea. Everything's sort of building, you know, on one another.
Sure. No, I think that's really good advice. I think the other thing too, and you can tell me your thoughts on this, is everybody out there listening needs to just start creating their own content. On whatever channel they're comfortable with, start there, and then eventually move to the channels that you're completely uncomfortable with and hate and despise. And why I say that is I started this show 4 years ago to get over my fear of public speaking. I feared it. Like,
I love
deathly
that.
feared
I love
it.
that.
So
yeah,
you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone. Slow, fast, somewhere in the middle, but you need to start creating your own content, and eventually you hope you get to a point where you're successful enough that you can get other people to maybe either help you write your content. Maybe you write the bullet points or a shorthand, or you write 3/4 of an article, 1/4 of an article, and you get somebody else to turn it into a full article or book or whatever. And then you have somebody else promote it, right? But you're still creating the content. They're just expanding on the content. And
absolutely.
So it sounds like you're in the same boat, right? Like, throughout the show, you've talked about doing a bunch of things to either help your career, push yourself out of your comfort zone, or you're doing other things to affect other parts of your life. Like, I think the best example is you joining a roller derby team to help you stay healthy and fit, to make your business better, which is pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, right? Is that fair to say?
Sure. For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, I will say it started out as something to do to get healthy, and then it ended up being, okay, this is the thing that scares me, you know. So you know that saying, do one thing every day that scares you. Yeah. Well, that was it for a while, you know.
Sure. And then it's not scary anymore, and you go on to the next thing that's scary, whatever that is.
Exactly.
Interesting. So so where do you go from here? Like, what does 2019 look like for you?
Well, I'm hoping to expand my speaking profile. You know, I've given these 2 TEDx talks.
Sure.
I'm hoping to start to build my career as a speaker, and I'm going to be writing some more. So hopefully I'll come out with another book or 2. And expanding my services. So, you know, I do podcast publicity, which is of course how you and I met, because I sent you some clients.
Yep.
So I'm going to look into maybe putting my money where my mouth is and creating my own podcast.
Very cool. You should. You very much should.
You know, yeah, I mean, I love conversations. And so I think it's probably the next frontier for me is getting out there and, you know, having my own podcast as another form of content that I'm creating.
No, I 100% agree. It's interesting. You touched on something that I think we should kind of dive a little bit deeper into. You and I connected, I can't remember, but we met online basically, right? Like, and then to your point, you sent me a few of your clients to be on my show. And so, and then I was like, well, let's talk about all the stuff you're doing, because I think it's very relevant to my audience as well, to get them thinking about all this stuff, right? Because I think doing a TED Talk is kind of, I get people could probably just Google it and or read your book, but it's still kind of this mystical thing that people don't really understand, right? And certain generations of people still just don't Google something, which I find really quite fascinating. Like my parents' generation, and I don't mean it mean, because I had my mother-in-law called me the other day and she's like, how come YouTube doesn't work on the Apple TV? And like, it was my old Apple TV that I gave her and I don't have one anymore. And I was like, I don't know. Let me Google it, why it's not on there. And you have to like install it now. Right. And it's just like certain generations don't Google things, right? Where,
oh, for sure.
Which is, to me, is like, it just seems crazy at first, but then you step back and it's like, well, no, like you and I grew up just Googling everything. Right. And so it's just like it's almost like an automatic reflex. And now I don't even Google it. I just ask Google and it just tells me. So, but so many people don't think about this stuff until they're kind of in it or whatnot. And the point I'm trying to make is there's people like you that have figured this stuff out, and people are willing to pay for that because it takes a lot of time to figure this stuff out, right? It takes months, years.
Absolutely.
And maybe like it takes years to master one platform, never mind all the platforms.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and I've, you know, the people that I work with generally, you know, it's not that they wouldn't be able to figure this out if they really took the time and committed to it. You know, especially with social media. Social media has to be engaged with every day. Yeah. It has to be taken care of at least Monday through Friday, you know. Yeah. And sometimes scheduled on the weekends, depending on who your audience is, you know. Sure. It's really just a matter of why take that time if there's somebody who's already an expert in it, and, you know, then that's their business. Because who has time to do it when you're running a business or writing your book or, you know, creating great content out there? Like, who has the time to also play around on Facebook?
Sure. No, fair. And creating new content, especially when it's about yourself, can be really, really challenging. Like, I've had other people on the show where they're like a expert on a certain platform and they struggle creating content for themselves on that platform that they help other people. But the fact that you're an objective third party, you can go into a company or speaker or whoever and say, look, you're in this space. People love content about you in these categories. So we're going to post more content in these spaces, where if you were doing it for me, I would be like, I don't know what people care about, but you could come in and say, you know what, Kevin, people care about these things, so let's post more about these things, right? And I think that adds more value than a lot of people think about, because it's a struggle to create your own content.
Oh yeah, it is. For sure it is, you know, because especially, you know, and for the longest time I was like, the cobbler's daughter has no shoes,
Sure.
where I was helping people create content and, advising them and everything. And my own social media platforms were really anemic.
Yep.
So I definitely get it's really hard to sort of know what your audience wants.
Yep.
And sometimes the social media platform will tell you. I'll give you an example. I have a client, and she's so good about creating content. She writes for LinkedIn. She writes for Thrive.
Right.
She's always creating new blog posts. And she did a podcast episode talking about her journey from entrepreneur to executive.
Okay.
And it had a lot to do with failure, and it had a lot to do with changing your dreams later in life and things like that. And 100 people interacted with it right away.
Wow.
On LinkedIn.
Very
all of a
cool.
sudden she had 100 likes, and we were like, and I logged, she wrote me, she was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, maybe that's the next thing you have to write about, because the audience is telling you, sometimes that takes some time, but
Sure.
if you're taking care of your audience, they'll let you know what they want.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's actually really good advice. But we're actually out of time. So let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about you, the books, the speaking, you helping them with TED, and any other links you want to mention.
Sure. Well, my website is incontrera.com, INCONTRERA.com. You can find me on LinkedIn or, Facebook, Twitter, etc.
Sure.
My email is marie.incontrera@gmail.com. And my books are on Amazon.
Perfect, Marie. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.